Hello everyone, it's Sarah from Abundantly Minimal here. And I did announce a few videos ago that I was not going to be filming anything during the month of June. However, based upon current events in the United States as well as other places worldwide, I knew that it was important for me not to stay silent on these issues, as well as to use my platform to be able to hopefully inspire positive change. Recently, I've been learning a lot and working on educating myself to figure out how I can best support breaking down racism and ending white supremacy. And I learned a lot and wanted to share these things in the video today. As is my typical style, I want to offer a very level-headed approach. I encourage you that even if this is something that you don't quite feel comfortable listening to, I hope that you'll stick around and watch this video and also start the learning process and join me. I'm not an expert. There may be issues here in today's video that I do not understand enough. And in my discussions today, I want to make sure that I will be amplifying Black voices and Black activists who are sharing this information and sharing their words, not my own words. This is not about me, but I wanted to make sure that I could use my platform for good. The first thing to address is the concept of silence, because for a long time, I was silent about racial issues. I knew what was going on, and yet I didn't speak up about it. There's a quote from Desmond Tutu that says, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." And as I've continued learning more, I realized just how hurtful this silence is to the communities that need support most and who are being the most oppressed. And I realized that if I didn't speak up about something, that I was supporting the oppressor, and in this case, the racism and white supremacy. The second lesson I've learned is that I need to be a lot more clear with the way I'm talking and the issues I'm speaking about. This particular post came from Naomi O'Brien from the teacher account Read Like a Rock Star. And she says here, "Don't say we when you mean I. Don't say it or this when you mean racism. Don't say we all when you mean white people. Be direct about what you are talking about. Centering white comfort does not help dismantle racism." And I was guilty of this. In her post, she made a great point about if someone's saying, "We need to end this," that sentence is problematic because we need to end this. Are you just starting out here? Is it I? Because there have been other people already working to help end racism. As well as when we say this, what are we talking about? It's important to be very clear. And that's one thing that just from this post itself and reflecting more about it has helped me learn how to better articulate myself. And it's actually made things a lot more clear and easier for me to understand and comprehend and feel like I can engage in dialogue by talking about these things. Previous in life, I don't think I ever felt comfortable talking about these things, but I realize now how problematic that was. And I did on both of my different Instagram accounts, I did post some apologies where I did hold myself accountable as well as share what actions I was taking. And I said that I am disappointed in myself because I am. If we just say we need to do better, that's not really taking personal accountability. This post has helped me a lot. I'm hopeful that it can help you feel more comfortable talking through these things. Ultimately, it's not about comfort, but if we're not having the conversations, then we're not making the same amount of progress. Just like if we're not being clear about what we're talking about, then it's vague and less likely to help, as Naomi says here, dismantle racism. Now, when we talk about racism and white supremacy, there are certain behaviors and actions that I think most would deem unacceptable, but there are many other behaviors, comments that don't necessarily get picked up on. And the Conscious Kid, which is a great account, they're linked below as well as any other organizations or individuals I talk about today. They put together this really helpful graphic where it talks about overt white supremacy and covert white supremacy. And you can see here, obviously the top portion, lynching, hate crimes, blackface, the N-word, these sort of behaviors are societally frowned upon and are shamed. Now, unfortunately, they still happen, but when we look below that black line there's a lot of different actions that many people who maybe consider themselves to be good people or not racist actually do have negative effects. And I think this is a situation where it's important to humble yourself, something I've done as well, and to think about, have you ever participated in any of these activities? If you've ever denied white privilege, if you've ever said comments like all lives matter, if you've engaged in cultural appropriation, if you've celebrated holidays like Columbus Day, if you have ever feared people of color, if you've ever said that you're colorblind, if you've heard racial jokes and didn't speak up about it. You can see here that there are many different behaviors listed that unfortunately are pretty common here in the United States and maybe other places as well. And in these situations where we're trying to have meaningful dialogue, it's easy for someone to get defensive and say, well, I'm not racist. But we have to break it down further and understand that white supremacy has really run deep in this country in the ways people act and the policies that are put in place. Now, one of the misconceptions that is often discussed when the concept of Black Lives Matter comes up is the response, all lives matter. And I think people misunderstand that Black Lives Matter is not meant to be exclusionary, which means it doesn't mean only Black lives matter and all other lives don't. The premise behind this is that throughout our entire history, including today, Black citizens have not been treated the same as white citizens. And whether it was with slavery, segregation and Jim Crow era, or even modern times where we see police brutality, mass incarceration, among many other challenges, Black citizens have never been valued equally when we look publicly or politically. And when someone says all lives matter, they are undermining the pain and suffering that has happened throughout the history of treatment of the Black community in the United States. There have been several different helpful examples in thinking about ways to engage in dialogue if you hear someone refer to the comment, all lives matter. One example, let's say there is a breast cancer fundraising event. You wouldn't go crash the event and yell out all cancer matters or all diseases matter, because that would be insensitive. It's about the people who are struggling with breast cancer and them trying to fundraise or get support to help with the cure for that. If a parent lost a child and is at their funeral delivering a eulogy, talking about how special they were, you wouldn't yell out, well, all children are special, because this is not about you. It's their moment. They're the ones who are suffering because they just lost their child. A final example that I've also seen and heard a lot is if there is a house on fire and the fire trucks are going to, go help put out the fire. You wouldn't go up to them and say, hey, stop what you're doing. All houses matter. The person might ask, is your house on fire? Well, no, but it still matters. No one's saying your house doesn't matter. The idea is your house is not on fire. Your house doesn't need the attention right now. And to connect to this, I would encourage you to check out Waste Free Marie. Her Instagram account recently posted a helpful guide about how to respond to common racist statements. So it might give you some additional guidance and ideas. Another thing we've seen a lot of is criticism of the protests. And before we unpack that a little bit, I think it's important here to examine the root cause. These protests didn't start happening for no reason. In this case, largely focused on police brutality. And to unpack this a bit, I wanted to share a post from Zerlina Maxwell. And she describes, here's an example of how white privilege sounds. You keep saying, it's horrible that an innocent Black man was killed, but destroying property has to stop. Instead, try saying, it's horrible that property is being destroyed, but killing innocent Black men has to stop. You're prioritizing the wrong part. And although I personally do not support damages and things that are happening to property technically can be, recovered, fixed, recovered from. Loss of life cannot. That life is gone forever. And we have to look at the root issues before we're criticizing. We also have to look at the history of protests in this country. And even within the last several years, there have been a lot of different peaceful protests. One common example was when Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem, and people were very offended by that. That was a peaceful protest. Was action taken from that? Unfortunately, no, or not enough. The bottom line here, the protests are a symptom of a deeper root cause, in this case, the racial injustice. If we fix the injustice and hold people accountable who need to be accountable for their actions, then protests will stop. Next, it's important that we address white privilege. One misconception that is often made is assuming that white privilege has to be economic privilege, and therefore many white individuals do not believe they have white privilege because they economically do not have privilege. But that is not the case. White privilege, as it sounds like, is specifically the privileges that come from being white. A few of the many examples of white privilege include less likely to be pulled over by police, less likely to be put in jail for the same offense as a person of color, being able to go to a store without being followed around or without people questioning whether you can afford something, seeing people who look like you and represent you in the media or in positions of power in companies or in government, as well as even down to toys that are available. Do you see people who look like you in the toys that you have? I know myself, growing up, I loved playing with different dolls, but unfortunately, at least 90% of the dolls that I had were white. That's a problem there. And these are all examples that don't have to do with economics, that have to do with just associations people make, whether someone's white or not. Another important layer I want to address comes from addressing racism with children. And there are white families who are hesitant to discuss these issues with their kids, or they think their kids are too young to have these conversations. I did want to share, this was a tweet from Tawny Newsome. She said, "For anyone worried about talking to their white children right now, worried that their kid is too young for these conversations, I was 5 or 6 when my dad told me, no matter what you do, some people will always hate you. Black children don't get to not understand racism." So there is an importance to having these conversations. And unfortunately, as I think there are many problems in life caused by not being able to communicate or not taking the time to communicate, this is part of the problem. And one of the things that I have learned and unfortunately not done a good job with myself as a teacher is being direct enough. And another quote here from Naomi O'Brien, she says, "If you're trying to teach your kids to be anti-something, you need to be direct and intentional about exactly what it is you're trying to teach them." General blanket statements of be kind, be a good person, those sorts of things don't help. And I have been guilty of not being direct enough, partially because I didn't understand yet how to communicate about it, and maybe I was too scared to communicate it because I didn't want to get anything wrong. But that was then detrimental to my students because I wasn't having those intentional conversations with them. Now, Naomi, as well as another teacher, Lanisha Tab, have created an incredible resource called The White Family's Guide for Talking About Racism. And they also have since released a second version, which is the POC Family's Guide for Talking About Racism. So both of those are available. I'll have them linked below. Jake and I do not yet have any kids, but I did purchase this guide, and I have found that it does an amazing job working through the tough issues, targeted specific questions to really have meaningful dialogue. And some of the reviews they've actually shared already were families who were stunned that their children, even as young as the age of 7, was already showing racial bias. Because of a resource like this, they were able to work through that. So if you personally have young children or know someone who does, I would highly recommend this resource. And the final lesson I have learned very clearly, and I hope to help pass on to you, is just the concept of doing the work for this. For the past many years, I could have been doing the work myself and engaged more in fighting racism, and I didn't. But this is a time where I can hopefully start helping make up for my inaction for many years. With this in mind, there's a lot of different ways that people can take action, whether it's through educating yourself, which I think is very important. Jake and I have started with the book White Rage by Carol Anderson, and it does have a very strong focus on taking you through the history of how the Black community has been oppressed in the United States, and it's been honestly far worse than I had any idea of. And even for someone who knows history well, most of the content I had never heard about. There's also some individuals linked below who I am personally learning a lot from. Now, with that in mind, I encourage you to check them out as well. But what I encourage you not to do is to specifically message them asking questions or asking them for help. This is an important opportunity for you to take initiative and do the searching yourself, just as I am doing myself. It's important to not expect them to have to teach you personally and walk you through it. There are amazing resources they've put together that you can use to help you do that and help you piece things together. This can be a great chance to just audit the diversity of the accounts that you choose to follow. Obviously, this is a minimalist YouTube channel, and unfortunately, on YouTube specifically, the minimalist community is very white, and that is a tragedy. And I want to close with a tweet from Ashley Island. She says, "Say what you need to on social media, then put down your phone and pick up your life. Not many will see you learning, confessing, repenting, uprooting, retooling, forgiving, inviting, empowering, but we will see its fruit. The hidden work is the heart work, is the hard work." So I thought that was a really powerful message to end on. And of course, this video here is imperfect. It's not enough. After this video is out, my role is going to be continue to learn as much as possible. Specifically for me, that's going to look like a lot of reading and continued education to help understand these issues better. And then specifically in my work through selling teacher materials on my Teachers Pay Teachers store. Jake and I have talked, and we'll be starting this month. We're donating 10% of all of our profits to social justice organizations. So that's something we wanted to make sure we weren't just donating now and then not doing anymore. So it will be ongoing every month. And starting next year, I'm doing more work with U.S. history, and I'll want to make sure that I have truly educated myself from these multiple perspectives and not the very limited and flawed Eurocentric, whitewashed history curriculums and textbooks that are widely used in U.S. history classrooms, but to make sure that I'm incorporating these other key details that really can change the game in how history is taught and what is taught, because I was horrified to find out already from just reading the first part of the White Rage book. I'm very disappointed in topics I didn't teach that, would change everything, really. So those are kind of just the ways I'll be taking action and continue to take action. I appreciate you watching this video, but again, this video is not about me. I hope that you will continue this message forward, have the tough conversations within your families, extended families, communities, friends, wherever it needs to take place, and that you'll also join me in amplifying Black voices and voices of those who have been oppressed for far too long. I'll see you next time.